And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. As always, I'm Brad, that's Mike, we're Dallas Geek, and we are your source for all of the latest nerdy news and geek culture. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm good, Brad.
Yeah?
It's still, hotter than shit outside, but...
I mean, sure,
other than, melting every time I walk to my car, I'm good.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Higher than shit, higher than hell, hotter than...
We can't say balls.
It's more the graphic picture that gets put together with the full thing.
Okay, that's fair.
Sure.
That's fair.
But yes,
Can we say taint?
I'd say that's borderline depending on context.
Okay. What about tainted?
Well, there you go.
Okay.
I think that will definitely pass the censors.
There we go.
But, yes, so we are back. If you did not join us last week for our initial foray into covering all of the Hollywood strike details, we're back again.
There's a strike going on?
Plural. Strikes.
Where the hell have I been? Anyway.
And so we are definitely back to discuss these more with a little bit more of a let's call it a tailored focus today. It's a bit less general and a bit more I guess would saying gremlin focused be appropriate, or is that an insult to gremlins?
I don't know. It's definitely taking a stance.
Sure.
I was going to say, what are we going to do? Play devil's advocate and try to see it from the side of the studios?
I mean, I feel like the AMPTP's already got that covered,
That's
so
true, yeah.
they don't really need the rest of us to play bootlicker for them.
That's true, so we just get to shit on people some more?
Yeah, I mean, it's well deserved, and considering the proclivities of most of the men of their income levels,
yeah.
it's probably something they'd enjoy.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Some people pay good money for that.
Some people also only pay $20 for it.
Some people won't pay at all.
That's
but then
true.
again,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're talking about today, is the men responsible for not paying the talent in Hollywood, specifically the studio CEOs.
I think
yeah.
they like to shit on people. I don't think they like to get shit on.
I mean, everybody likes their submissive moments, especially supposedly powerful men. It's
not
a thing,
when it involves
apparently.
poo.
You say that, and yet, I'm sure there are some little black books out there that would say otherwise.
Oh, I'm sure there's videos out there too, but I mean that doesn't mean that I want to see or read about it.
Never said we had to witness it.
That's fair.
God no.
No.
But no. So, Hollywood CEOs, obviously, they are kind of the biggest point of contention in this whole saga of Hollywood strikes. As much as
not just CEOs, but executives in general.
Yeah, because, I mean, the problem is, as much as the different articles that we read love to focus exclusively on the role of the AMPTP and how they are prolonging the strikes,
Yes.
the reality is the AMPTP are just representatives of the demands of the studio execs. Whether the CEOs, the presidents, whoever is the man, the old white man, there we go, at the top of the pay scale.
I mean, true. But there's also something else that these people have in common.
Aside from being old white men?
Yeah, they're all douchebags.
Same thing.
Okay. You're an old white man.
No. I'm a decrepit white man. There's a difference.
That's very true.
A lot less gray as the minimum, and definitely, you know, the existence of a soul tends to make a bit of a difference.
I think you're being generous with that soul thing, but continue.
I mean, you don't see like a black hole somewhere in me just sucking all joy out of every room I go into, do you? Like what you see?
No. A little too hairy for my taste.
Thank you. Yeah, the Hollywood execs, CEOs,
they've really been the ones taking the hardline stance on, like, we're not budging.
Well, so...
And they've been telling the representatives of the AMTP, or...
AMPTP.
Thank you. Like, this is a hardline, like, we don't really care what their demands are. Let them basically talk to the blue. Let them talk until they're blue in the face. We're not budging.
Yeah. Well,
like, they are really the ones calling the shots in terms of when both sides come to the negotiating table. The side representing the studios is really coming to the negotiating table with the, you know, direct, basically marching orders that we're not actually here to negotiate.
Yeah, and I mean, this really is our modern day let them eat cake moment, because Bob Iger and David Zaslav have both been publicly acknowledged as stating that they are not withholding agreements on the strikes because of the money.
No.
They have both publicly stated that the reason why they are choosing to not give in to any of the major demands from either SAG or the WGA is because they want to use this moment to discourage other groups and unions in Hollywood from attempting the same thing.
Right.
This is
because, I mean, look at the amount of unions that have been created in the time that this is going on,
or voted to be created.
Right.
I mean, this is 100% punitive.
Yep.
And has absolutely nothing to do with the money, because both Warner, Discovery, and Disney have both already lost more in revenue than it would have cost them to just pay 100% of what the WGA or SAG has been asking for per year.
This is about keeping.
It's already cost them more.
This is about keeping power.
Yeah.
Like, let's call a spade or whatever turn of phrase you want to use. This is all about studio executives trying to keep the power structure the way it has been in Hollywood for decades, which is the studios run everything. You are property of the studio.
Yes.
You work for us. Be glad that you work for us, peon. We can replace you tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
That's the status quo that they're trying to keep.
Yeah, and what's making this...
They're not actors, they're people. Or they're not people, they're actors.
Yeah, and what's making this so much worse is the fact that...
You know, what's the joke from the Muppets remake from 2008? Like, we all agreed that a celebrity isn't a person. Like, well, unfortunately, the studio execs really think that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that really makes this all the worse is the fact that as of right now, it does not seem like there is really anything that anybody else can do to override the decisions of these execs who are pulling the strings of all of this behind the scenes. Well, I mean, not so behind the scenes, considering they are more than willing to give public statements.
Right.
But,
yeah. Even though they're technically not supposed to?
Yeah, there is supposed to be a media blackout, but, I mean, since when have Hollywood execs ever followed the rules? Especially if the rules were not necessarily legal as much as just good courtesy.
Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. I really just showed restraint.
Oh, I know.
Unlike,
I appreciate that.
Unlike a lot of Hollywood executives. Oh, shit, I just ruined it.
So, I mean, look, the frustrating thing for all of us viewers at home is that, especially for those of us who it's our job to be able to cover new stuff in Hollywood. Yeah, does it suck that we can't cover new content made by these companies that are being struck? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the fact that right now we have to be talking about this instead of going absolutely crazy over what happened on last night's episode of Ahsoka.
Still haven't started it. Heard it's amazing.
Oh, you need to hurry.
Yeah.
Like that hurts so much. But the fact is, we are not going to be the ones to mess this opportunity up to make a point. Especially because it's not like these executives need to worry about the ramifications of the strike.
Like, and that's the thing that I texted you when we were kind of doing prep this morning as I was laying in bed with my back locked up and
because you're
like
an
I was
old man,
90 years old. Jesus. Is like, at what point does this become a violation of like their fiduciary commitment to shareholders? Because these are all publicly traded companies. So like, while what we're about to get into is, you know, the fact that maybe the executives, CEOs, presidents ain't gonna be hurting for money. But like, at what point does this turn into they're actively doing harm to the shareholders?
Oh, already are.
And then like the SEC actually has to do their job and step in. Let's be honest.
And that's the thing.
Because working for the company that I work for,
yes,
we remember some people that are in the know remember that whole stock craze in 2021, and that was people making money off of it. And what happens when people start losing money?
That's the thing. When it comes to regulatory necessity,
right?
The executives that we're dealing with here, are they supposed to have a fiduciary responsibility to the stockholders? Yes.
Yes.
In practice, is that how it actually works? Debatable.
Right.
It takes a lot for the feds to step in and supersede the actions of the executives for these publicly traded companies.
Right.
Because the fact of the matter is, as much market instability as these type of damaging actions by these Hollywood executives does cause, the feds stepping in to exert any level of control over the studios would cause more. Yeah. And unfortunately, even in cases like this, where it is very clear that the executives are in the wrong, you are going to have a large amount of Wall Street who is still going to be more upset at the negative effects of the Fed's interference than the actions of the studio executives that caused the Feds to intervene in the first place. Which it makes this so much more frustrating, because we know for a fact that the executives for these studios have no reason to worry about whether or not profits for the studios are going to be down. Because if you are, say, Bob Iger, your compensation is guaranteed based on the term of your contract. It is, as far as we've been able to find, has nothing to do with any metrics of the company. Same thing for like NBC Universal's interim president. It is interim president, right? Is what his title is?
He's the president of Comcast. He's the interim CEO of NBC Universal.
There it is.
Because they had to fire the last guy for, well,
conduct unbecoming.
Yeah.
Which is the fancy way of saying he tried to diddle some people who were very not okay with it.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, no, yeah.
You didn't see that?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I did not.
Also, by the way, Nancy Pelosi sold her Disney stock last month, so that's how you know this thing's probably going for a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but that's the
insider congressional trading. I mean, is it going to tell you a lot about what's actually happening behind the scenes? Sure. Does it actually mean much of anything to the rest of us? No, because by the time we find out what Congress has or has not been doing, it no longer benefits us. So, you know, because when have politicians ever helped us?
Well, there was a time. You know, not in our lifetimes, but there was a
time.
No,
definitely not. Basically, if you were born before the 80s, you had a somewhat decent chance of a politician somewhere being beneficial to you, if not finding at least a few.
Not Carter, though.
80s and on, that's the era of Wall Street and corporate greed really getting comfortable. So it hasn't really been good since then.
Mid to late 80s. I'd say like 86 and on.
I'd say that's pushing it.
Yeah, probably like 84. Yeah.
But no, so the big issue that's the big issue with Iger.
Right.
His compensation, you know, the what was it, 25 million? You said over the term of his contract.
Yeah, and they just restructured because he was only supposed to be back for a year or two.
Yep, and now it's for 5, I believe.
I believe you're right. I think he's restructured through 2026. Because they basically tacked on time onto what was supposed to be his expiring contract, if I remember right.
Then you have, the worst offender here, who has continued to be the worst offender of just about every other executive in Hollywood, and is the reason why reality TV exists, and the reason why we can continue to just assume that most entertainment is going to keep going down the tube. David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery.
Yep.
Yes, that is right. David Zaslav is single-handedly responsible for the rise of reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
And David Zaslav...
and he's made a shitload of money doing it, too.
The same David Zaslav that just yesterday came out in a Variety article from a press conference saying that Warner Discovery is going to be taking between a $300 to $500 million hit to their annual earnings for this year, which, you know, is very concerning for investors. However, he did want to point out that due to the strikes, they've also been able to save $100 million in available cash, which is the really important part here, because neither the Variety article nor any other article that has talked about the scum-sucking who is David Zaslav, bothers mentioning that his annual bonus is tied not to studio revenue, not to studio profits, but to available cash on hand at the end of the year, which means the studio can lose hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. But if out of their initial operating budget, he's able to save $100+ million that didn't have to be spent from that original budget, that counts as a positive for his bonus, which means he gets his bonus. Nobody else is going to, but he will. So he has every reason to let these strikes keep going on, because if he can continue to find more ways to say that they have more available cash on hand, that just means a higher bonus for him.
Well, and that's why I brought up the fiduciary responsibility.
It's a severe conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because he's actively saying the studio can lose money, which is fine, because we're saving this much money. But profits are directly influenced in, obviously, salaries, bonuses, everything like that for every other structure of the company.
Yes.
And also for the general health and growth of said company. Not only in terms of market share, but stock exchange growth as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this not turn into he is actively basically sabotaging the profits and wages of others to make himself wealthier?
Well, that's the thing.
Like that's what I don't get. Like when you get to this
narrative,
level, like when you get to this level of, I'm trying to think of the correct word that I want to use here. Like when you get
greedy.
Like it's not just the greed. It's like the malfeasance of the fact that you are actively basically, f***ing people out of their bonuses and their wages for the sake of yours.
I mean, not to get political on you, but I mean, anybody who makes hundreds of millions of dollars, or even, like tens of millions of dollars per year for themselves, or who has a net worth of 100 million plus, or in some of these cases billions, you can't really say that they got those funds from an honest day's work. I mean, every one of them, to some extent, had to steal it from either the companies they worked for or the people who worked for those companies, either through underpaying them, not paying them, or just generally finding ways to screw the business and therefore the employees out of profits. Like that's literally the only way that works mathematically. It is physically impossible for any one person to be able to earn through their own labor that much money in a given year without stealing it. And unfortunately, guys like Zaslav and Iger are prime examples of this, because have we talked about the fact that Iger has done some good things for Disney over the years? Yeah, we've talked about that plenty. But does that make him a good person? No, because every time we've talked about him in any kind of positive light, we've always had to put that stipulation on there that he's also kind of a terrible human being. And there's really no way around it. Regardless of which executive you're talking about, and regardless of what movies, projects, whatever, that they were responsible for greenlighting that you personally enjoyed, that does not change the fact that I can't remember a single major Hollywood executive who has ever been spoken about positively by the people who work for the companies that are below the C-suite.
Right.
Like I can't. I mean, we know so much of the history of Hollywood. I cannot remember a single executive from any point in the entire history of Hollywood where that level of executive has ever been liked by their employees. I mean, with the exception of maybe your Charlie Chaplin's, but even then, those studios were really considered independent studios at the time, and I mean, by today's standards, would be considered kind of nothing, considering the monstrosities that the big guys have become.
Walt Disney, maybe?
Yeah, Walt is probably the one that you could say. And even then, I mean, as you like to always point out, there's still controversy around him. I mean, hell, one of the biggest controversies is still the story behind his procurement of and use of the story for Mary Poppins. I mean,
God, Saving Mr. Banks is such a great movie, though.
Oh yeah, but
It's very Hollywoodized.
oh, 100%.
And very positive to Disney.
But
it's still a great movie.
yeah, but I mean, that just goes to show that even Uncle Walt was not safe from his controversies.
No.
And I mean, the controversies always go back to people, some person out there considering them to be a terrible human being. It's just that as time has progressed, the level of how terrible of a human being these executives have become has changed.
Well, I guess, but...
Because, I mean, the closest we've seen to this level of greed and lack of consideration for the well-being of the actual people who make the movies and shows in Hollywood.
Yeah.
The closest we can really say that's even comparable to this would be back, I'd say almost like right before the founding of United Artists.
oh, Jesus, that would have been...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, back at the height of Hollywood corruption, right before the Paramount Accords, right before any thought of antitrust came into the perspective of how Hollywood was viewed by the government or the people, and it really goes to show that the fact that that's the closest we can look back on to say that is the one other real time where the studios themselves were as bad in their treatment of their employees as we have today is pretty impressive, because that was terrible, but even by those standards, what we're seeing now completely dwarfs that.
Well, and to that point too, no successful person is without their controversies, right? Getting to that level of success, let's just be very honest. There is something, whether it be morally or legally questionable, you've done to get there, right?
Sure.
Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, is it the fact that now, you've gotten to this point where people are more corrupt and they're more morally ambiguous? Or is it just that we live in a 24-hour news cycle where information is more readily accessible, and now just, the sunlight and the bleach are a little bit more easily accessible onto the dirty parts of the industry?
I think it's a little bit of both. Because the problem is, are every single executive in Hollywood as bad as the main two that we keep referring to? No. They are not. Not every one of them are as bad. Hence the fact that AMC has been able to come to an interim agreement with SAG in order to be able to go back to production overseas for a few of their shows, and to be able to go back to promoting some of the upcoming seasons for their shows.
Yeah. Pretty much everything Walking Dead related.
And a couple others. But so clearly...
The Walking Dead stuff being the ones.
Clearly not every one of them is as bad. And I mean, hell, even there's been an interview that's been going around from Adam Driver for this past week.
Oh, good old Ben Swallow.
Coming out and talking about the fact that he found it so difficult to understand how it is that the smaller independent studios, I'm blanking on the name, but the one that he just did a movie with, he's actually talking about, they were able to not only abide by the rules from SAG and the WGA, but they were actually able to pay fair compensations across the board, and were able to, treat the people making their movies humanely. Same thing for studios like A24 and a bunch of the other smaller art house options, and yet you look at the bigger studios, like your Disney's, like your Warner, and they say that they can't because they can't afford it. And you try to understand how that even works because it does not logically make sense. And I mean, he made some really good points, and you can go find this online pretty much anywhere. But
silence your damn phone, Brad.
No more vibrate. But yeah, so you can go find this out there, and I mean, he makes some really solid points, but it does go to point out that, yeah, not every studio exec is terrible, but you get to the bigger names, and it gets increasingly harder to say that they aren't.
Well, especially since some of these guys and gals have actually gone on and like started their own production companies.
Yeah.
Right? Like Ryan Reynolds has his own production company. Stephen Amell, I know he was in the middle of some controversy for some of the comments that he made, but him being the head of his own production company that produces the show that he's on, you kind of understand where he's coming from with some of the comments that he made.
Sure.
Were they not the best thing that he could have said?
No.
But do you understand where he's coming from in that they literally have the new season of the show that he is the head showrunner on, head producer on, one of the head writers, one of the stars, putting in one of the most, you know, in terms of financial investments, probably the largest for that series, and then it's like, boom, dead, can't promote it, can't do anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Does it suck for him and guys like him? Sure.
Right. But you understand where those guys are coming from, and you understand where those gals are coming from that have, you know, that are, you know, like executive producers on pretty much all of their films, like have creative control over all of their films, have started their own production companies.
It goes back to the video game industry problem that we've talked about.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much work the production company does. The moment that the publishing and distribution company screws up, everybody gets blamed. It's the same thing here.
Yep.
Only difference is while the names of the production companies are more readily known in video games than they tend to be in movies and TV, you have a few standouts, but overall, a lot of the production companies just aren't as well known. All you get to really do as the viewing audience is just see the big names that are ultimately to blame for this.
Right.
And unfortunately, you can't make the nuanced judgment call about, well, yeah, you know, somebody like Stephen Amell's production company shouldn't be held to blame on this one, and is that going to hurt him personally?
They're going to take a hit, absolutely.
But unfortunately,
everybody that works at that production company that's going to take a hit.
Yeah.
So it's like, you kind of understand where guys like that are coming from, but then when you look at guys like Zaslav, like Bob Iger, like I can't remember his name, but the CEO of Paramount that makes like $34 million a year, that had like a $16 million pay jump from 2021 to 2022 because he vested and bonused in $16 million in stock options. You're like,
yeah,
like you guys are the ones that are really putting a block on the fact that we're not coming to the table and actually negotiating in good faith. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like,
and that doesn't even touch on the massive that is going on over at Netflix.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the thing. It's easy to be able to go after the legacy names,
right?
But unfortunately, Netflix is, or at least has become, just as bad, if not worse in certain respects, than the legacy names.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, not even to mention the fact that after SAG and the WGA had really continued to put emphasis on the fact that they needed assurances in any negotiations that they were going to be doing with the AMPTP, that AI was not going to be used to replace any of their union members' jobs. Netflix was the first one to, as soon as those initial specific talks ended in a no compromise situation, Netflix was the first one to go out and put out a job listing for a, quote, AI specialist for a $900,000 a year salary.
What was that AI specialist supposed to do, Brad?
Well, that's the thing. The job description was very generic, but was very clear that their job was going to be to do exactly the things that the unions were saying they wanted protection against. And that the fact that Netflix, being the worst offender of streaming services as far as not paying any kind of residuals or royalties, and being one of the worst offenders of just really not respecting the work that goes into their productions, as far as promoting, as far as even putting it out there after it's been completed, or just shelving it indefinitely or whatever. Then you go in and you, as you pointed out, the executive chairman, Reed Hastings, gets a $500,000 salary,
which, as a top executive, that's about ballpark.
That's
right?
Reasonable by comparison. But then, you know, $2.5 million in stock options.
Okay, that's not terrible. It's not, you know, I mean, for a top executive of one of the biggest streaming services, I mean, basically what would equate to a $3 million salary.
And considering that they do not have the legacy existence that the big studios have,
right,
which means they don't have the same war chest of reserves saved up.
Right.
I mean, that's still pretty rich for a company
Absolutely,
like that.
Yeah.
Because right now we're able to easily compare his salary and compensation package to that of Hollywood, realistically, because Netflix considers themselves to be a tech company.
Right.
You got to compare it to other tech CEOs. And as far as tech CEOs, $500,000 salary and $2.5 million in stock options, unless you're Apple or Microsoft, that's pretty rich.
Right, that's fair.
Like that is a pretty steep annual.
That's fair.
And then going in for the co-CEO.
This is where it gets a little ridiculous.
Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters having $3 million annual salaries with, was it $20 million in stocks? Like that's with eligible bonus for up to $17 million additional.
That's just Ted Sarandos.
Oh, sorry, that's Ted. And then Peter is 17.3 mil in stock, and bonus of up to 14.3. Sure. And right there, that puts them well above any tech executives and right back up there with Hollywood executives' compensation.
Oh, I mean,
which is
like, even if they get the even if they
insane.
Even if they get the median of their up to bonuses, that still basically pulls both of those guys into what the, like, in math properly, because math is terrible. What is that? Probably like in the 15 to 18 million a year range, give or take.
I'm sure your fiance loves it when you say that.
Oh, she knows how I feel about math. It's devil, to quote Mama Boucher.
Sure. But
that's the thing, like, when you hear these numbers, like, hey, look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a registered conservative.
But
if you want your money, go get your money. If you work hard, who's to say that, you know, you don't deserve the salary that you negotiated, right? But when you say, like, we don't have the money to pay you guys this and that, but then when you hear numbers like that, like, sure, you negotiated that salary, that's great, that's your money. But don't sit here and demonize us for saying that we're not getting what we're worth. Because that's the problem that I have in this whole thing, is not that, it's not that they're saying that they don't have the money to spend or to spare, because I don't expect you to pull out of your own pocket to pay me. I don't. But don't sit here and say that the companies don't have the revenue to do it, and don't sit here and say that we're asking for more than we're worth.
And that's where I would differ from you, because for me, I would say, should the Hollywood executives take from their own pockets in order to compensate their employees? Absolutely. I think every one of them should, by force from the stockholders themselves, be required to take a massive haircut in compensation, because there isn't a single one of them who has earned anywhere close to what they are getting from the studios, especially, and you especially cannot justify what they are receiving when so many of the people that actually make the movies and shows that get them that salary, that bonus, those stock options, are not even able to afford insurance, and they continue to push the culture within Hollywood, that if you are new to writing, if you are new to acting, if you are new to any of the major creative pursuits that makes these shows and movies, you should just expect that a lot of your early efforts are just supposed to be given away for free in order to prove that you're good enough, and just assume that in the process these people are not going to end up starving themselves, potentially to a very dangerous point, for the sake of calling themselves seasoned or somehow justified, even though you still have a lot of the studios that will continue to go to seasoned professionals in the industry, people who have been writing for 20 plus years, people who have been editing or doing special effects for their entire careers, and continue to ask even those people to just give for free their talents.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
The fact of the matter is, these executives are the ones that are continuing to push this culture that is explicitly based on the exploitation of the people who make the things that make the money.
Yeah, of course.
It is intentionally exploitative, and as long as they are going to continue to promote exploitative practices, not one of them deserves to keep the level of compensation that they are receiving, because if they're going to either personally or just get the company to steal from their employees, then the stockholders and employees should be allowed to take those funds back in order to give them to the people actually making the stuff that makes these men rich.
Yeah, see,
because at the end of the day, you're always going to have the argument that, well, the studios can't give more money because the studios have a certain operating cost. And regardless of what kind of fictional math you want to use to say this is how much it costs to run this studio for a day, a month, a year, whatever.
Right.
Because most of it is just fake math that they use for the sake of justification.
All math is fake. But continue.
All math is made up, but only some math is fake.
That's true.
But the fact of the matter is, they can justify that all they want, but the only thing that they cannot justify with that fake math is the executive compensation, because while you can say, well, it takes X millions of dollars or X billions of dollars to keep NBC Universal running for a year and all their productions. Okay, I don't believe the number you're giving me, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on this one. You can say that, and with all the different moving parts, maybe there's some truth to that. But then you go to the executives and say, okay, well, can you use the same justification for why the executive team is making tens of millions of dollars per year, hundreds of millions, like every 5, 6, whatever, And then if they leave, they're given a guaranteed exit compensation of, like another 10 million or whatever.
Right.
While keeping whatever stock options they had while they were there.
Yep.
Can use the same justification they did for the studio cost to justify the executive pay? And the answer is no. It is not possible to use the same math because they, as a person, don't have a multi-million-dollar operating cost to live. They do not have a $100 million minimum in order to wake up, go to work, eat, and go to sleep. That is not how people work. Therefore, you can't use the same justification for them. So I am I am more than willing to say, pull the compensation incentive from the executives. Have the employees and the investors forcibly cap that so that it discourages this type of behavior from the executives, and use it to use those funds along with whatever other available profits are sitting around with the studio, not actually doing anything of genuine use, and give those back to the people making the shows and the movies, and let them just afford to live, let alone actually have a chance at saving up for retirement, or being able to pay for their kids to go to college, or be able to afford to pay for a medical emergency if it comes up.
Yeah,
because working 70-80 hour weeks definitely is not prone to causing medical emergencies.
Yeah, but my only concern with that argument is then you get into the argument of, well, if these guys don't deserve it, then the top earning actors don't deserve what they make, so they should take out of their salaries to put back in for underpaid actors as well. Because there's no way that you can tell me that somebody like The Rock that plays the same character in every movie that he's in should have made $87.5 million from just film in 2020. The Rock was the highest paid actor in 2020 at almost $100 million. That doesn't include revenue share or anything like that. That's literally just his salaries for film. There is no way somebody like that should make that much money to pretend to be somebody on camera.
I mean, should there be a total rethinking of compensation rates across the board for the highest earners in Hollywood? Yes. Now, how much of that should affect the top earning actors versus the top earning executives? I'd be willing to say there's an easier justification for the executives to be financially hit than the actors when there's not a single movie out there that gets people to go to the theaters because of who the CEO of the studio is.
Completely agree.
And so there's always going to be some level of justification for the actors to some extent to be able to say that, hey, it's these specific actors, these specific names that put butts in seats for the theaters, or encouraged buying of physical media or whatever. So there's always going to be that justification. Should it be a little bit lower than it is? Maybe. But the executives, there's not a single one of them that can say that they single-handedly were responsible for anything close to that.
But my problem with that is then, if the movie that they're on loses money, do they have to give their salary back? Because that salary was under the assumption in the agreement that this movie would turn a profit. So therefore, if you put out a movie that's a bomb and you're the star of it, hey, you have to give us that $20 million back.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why I think there needs to be a complete rethinking of the highest levels of compensation across the board in Hollywood. Because if you made $80 million up front on a movie, that, I mean, by most metrics is absurd. And in a case like that, should there be some thought of, would you be able to potentially justify taking back some of that for movies that can't even make back their production cost? I mean, it sounds less unreasonable when you're talking about those levels of money. But if you were to just completely adjust the entire pay scale for the highest earners, so that regardless of how much a movie makes, the highest paid actor on any given set doesn't make anywhere near that. Let's say we can bring it down so that it becomes more reasonable to say somebody of like a Tom Cruise level at best pulls 20 to 25 million.
Nope.
For a movie. No, I'm saying let's say we bring it down so that so somebody at like a Tom Cruise level only makes about 20 to 25 rather than 80, 100 plus, whatever. At that point, then you are able to say that not only did you pull back on the overall budget to make the movie in the first place, but now you have more potential money available from the budget to pay the rest of the cast and crew. And that, I think, makes it a bit easier to justify needing to have a larger conversation about financial compensation in Hollywood across the board. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
But here's the thing with that $100 million that Tom Cruise made in 2022. What came out in 2022?
Didn't he have 3 movies?
Which he's executive producer on.
Yeah.
Which he's also co-contributor. I think he also has writing credits.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to get technical, that guy's putting in probably the biggest amount of cash. He's taking the biggest amount of risks. So the risk would be the reward of that.
Yes, but at the same time, it's one thing to be getting, $80, $100 million if you are the financial backer, you are the
right.
you're the director, or you're the showrunner, the main producer, you are the whatever, you have multiple major credits to your name for that movie. It's one thing to be able to say that, because at that point you're doing multiple jobs. You technically should be earning multiple salaries on that one because of the work, as long as it's justified. But to make something like 80 million as just the actor, not having the executive producer label, not having the whatever, just as an actor, to be able to say, an actor for only acting made 50 to 80 million dollars.
Right.
That's a very different conversation.
Because here's the thing, because here's the thing that people on the outside looking in think that this is billionaires and millionaires yelling at each other.
Yeah, which is only like maybe 1% of the people involved in this.
Right.
Maybe 1%.
Right. But it's hard to dispel that notion when you have guys that are literally like people that pretend and play make-believe that make millions of dollars a year.
Yes.
So now, granted, you see those names and you think, that's what everybody's getting. Like, no, those are the top paid ones. Like, most of your TV actors, that kind of stuff, depending on, if you're a series regular, how many scenes you appear in and everything like that, get X amount and everything like that. My concern is that we're demonizing people that are trying to make a stand and saying that they're worth more than what they're being compensated.
Yeah.
I have no problem with them saying we think that we're worth more. I have a general problem with people that negotiate their salary that are told that you make too much. Because that's an agreed upon salary by multiple parties involved. Like, if Tom Cruise made $100 million in 2022 and he took the biggest financial risk, I'm not going to sit there and say you don't deserve that $100 million.
Let me.
That's my concern about where the argument goes, versus people saying like we deserve a living wage based on the living conditions of Hollywood. Like, we don't want you to give up what you have. We just want you to lift us up to a respectable level. That's what I'm afraid gets lost in the whole argument of, like, well, CEO shouldn't make that much. This guy shouldn't make that much. Hey, I don't care what they make and they make. I'm worried about, like, the 95%, like you said, that are struggling to pay for things like health insurance, like a living wage in Hollywood and everything like that. Like, just raise everybody up to where they make a respectable amount, and then let's let everything fall as it may. Like, let's get them from the basement to at least the bottom floor of the house, and then we can look at everything else.
Yeah, step one should be that, absolutely.
Right.
But let me reframe what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
It shouldn't necessarily, when it comes to reframing the concept of
That smells good.
top earning for Hollywood,
Yeah.
pay rates of any kind.
Yeah.
The conversation should not be, under any circumstances, you make too much money, or you negotiated too much money. What the conversation should be is that the studios should not have allowed negotiations to result in such high levels of compensation that are considered unreasonable for the roles that that person performs within the structure of the studio.
And that's a fair argument.
Because the problem is, and I mean, I know that the studio is just a bunch of people. It is not itself a living entity.
That we know of. Who knows what kind of black magic is going on in
Disney.
Hollywood.
I mean, Disney could actually be.
No kidding.
But no, like that's the thing. Yes, the studios themselves are not living entities, but the fact of the matter is there does need to be a complete revamping of Hollywood studios so that it's not even a question of whether or not somebody negotiated X amount for their pay as the CEO or as the lead of a movie. It should simply be that the studios are forced to more fairly compensate everybody across the board.
Absolutely.
Which, to do that, necessitates the reducing of the highest allowable negotiated rate for the highest currently paid positions, so that there is not such a massive disparity between like studio execs and the people who actually make the movies, so that there is at least not such a massive disconnect for the executives financially to be able to understand where the typical employees are coming from.
Yeah.
But more importantly, so that when it comes to trying to continue to negotiate ongoing fair pay for everybody else, there is not such a massive gulf in what everybody's getting paid to the point that it could allow such a huge disparity on the low end. Because the higher the high can go, the lower the low can be justified in contrast. And if you bring things closer to the middle for the extremes, in order to be more appropriate to the actual work that is done, what you will end up with is a compensation method that brings everybody to a place closer to mutually beneficial than anything that we're looking at today.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. I would say the problem is, I'm going to use a sports analogy, and I'm sorry. I am.
Sure.
So football. We live in Texas. Kind of a big deal here.
Right? Unavoidable, but sure.
So, quarterbacks in the NFL. So the general pay rate for a quarterback in the NFL is the next quarterback to get a contract gets more than the guy before him.
I mean,
even if he's not better than the guy before him.
I was about to say that. I mean, that seems like a kind of dumb standard, but sure.
Agreed 100%, right? But that's the team making that choice to do it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Once that's been done, it's hard to put everything back in Pandora's box.
Oh yeah,
pretty much impossible, which is unfortunate.
Impossible without revolution,
right?
Just like what you have if you want to fix a government, if you want to fix politicians, it's really hard to be able to get a complete fix.
Of course,
if you're just going to leave the same system and the same people in place.
The biggest scam to me is the university system, especially for college athletes.
I mean, yeah, kind of.
Oh, college football players make their universities hundreds of millions of dollars, and well, we can't compensate.
Professional career.
We can't compensate them because they're amateur athletes, but they're paid because we waive their tuition and we waive their books, and that seems like a fair compensation. A couple $100 on the weekend, when so, which is why they had the NIL deal, the name, image, and likeness thing, and everything come through, right?
Sure.
So I think to be 100% honest, I think if you want what you want, like, you would basically have to break down the entire pay structure at a studio.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
The question is how do you do that? Because as
it takes one.
Right.
It takes one studio.
Which one's going to be the one?
Obviously, it's not going to be Disney, and it ain't going to be Warner.
Because here's the other thing too, which is unfortunate. You set the precedent, just like every quarterback now. Mm-hmm. The next CEO that comes in, well, wait a minute, that guy was making $28 million. Why are you telling me that I'm going to come in and do the same job as him and only make 12?
Yeah,
I'm not going to take that job. Go fuck.
Smooth.
I saved it. I didn't get to the "k" before I hit the censor button.
I mean, if you start, stop, and then finish, stop. I mean, I feel like that kind of adds up to a single whoops.
Fair.
But obviously Disney and Warner Discovery, they're not going to be the ones to pull the trigger on this. But like, if you were to get, say, NBC Universal or Paramount, or I don't know. Get somebody who's not one of those two. Like, literally anybody that's in the let's say top 10, other than those two. Get any one of them to fully restructure their pay scales to correct for these massive disparities. They set the precedent, and then that gives the unions, and that gives all the other workers the negotiating power to try to start pushing for some of the same changes at the other studios. And then after a second one gives in, whether because of worker pressure or investor pressure, that second domino falls, the rest of the studios are going to sooner than not get put in a position where they will have to have their own internal reckoning. And it becomes a point where all it takes is one to start.
I just don't see it happening, especially in an industry like Hollywood.
I don't know. I think if
just like Congress,
the strikes go on long enough,
it's just like Washington. All we need is one senator to say that no, we shouldn't be able to basically insider trade and not be held to the same standards as everybody else.
I mean, technically, you have two right now that you would never have assumed would agree on any issue.
That's true.
But no, I mean, that's the thing. Depending on how long the strikes go on, And how many other groups within the industry unionize in the meantime?
Right.
It may be a bit far-fetched, but it could actually be possible to force that level of systemic change in Hollywood if the major studios in the AMPTP allow the strikes to go on long enough that ultimately, in the public perspective, the unions and the employees are able to get enough goodwill behind them to justify the bigger fight.
Maybe.
Like I said, it may be a bit far-fetched, but I mean, we already know that it's very likely that these strikes are going to go into next year. What happens if we get to the 1 year mark and we are still no closer to a negotiation? What do you think happens at that point? Because just with how quickly you've had other groups within the industry vote to unionize since the start of just 2 strikes. If we make it to an entire year without a acceptable set of terms to be given from the studios to the actors and the writers, how many more groups do you think are going to choose to unionize, at the very least out of spite, if not because they were genuinely emboldened by the solidarity that they've found in the other people in their industry?
I think if it makes it a year, it'll be a minor miracle, because unfortunately, I think what you're going to see happen is, and I kind of agree with Stephen Amell on this when he said that striking is a bad idea, because remember what that one executive said? All we have to do is wait for rent to be due. And
what other tool do they have to be able to fix their situation?
I completely agree.
Because that's the problem.
But what's going to happen
if you don't strike and force an agreeable compromise now to protect their futures, we already know that with the actions the studios are taking today, the jobs of writers and actors are going to be in jeopardy of no longer existing in just a matter of years.
But unfortunately, I don't think they had enough leverage to pull this off right now.
WGA does. The WGA has enough funds set aside to be able to go for the long term. SAG supposedly does. And the thing is, when you have smaller groups, like, say, all the late night hosts right now, going in and doing a joint podcast with all proceeds going towards their writers.
It's so bad. It is so terrible.
Oh, I don't doubt it. But
like, wow, you guys are really hurting for those writers, huh?
you go and you see something like that. You see other outside groups that are agreeing to contribute funds to the union strike funds. Eventually, if this goes on long enough, I think you're going to see more and more groups backing the strikers, funding the strikes. And after a point, it's going to, I think is going to get to a point where, because of general public support, you're going to start having companies who traditionally would have supported the studios actually backing the unions out of fear of public backlash.
See, I think it's going to be the exact opposite. I think if it gets to a certain point, if it gets to the year mark, I think that it's gonna, like, I see the backlash hitting more the writers and actors than I do the studios. And the reason I say that is because I unfortunately think people still have that conception, or that, I guess, misconception, that this is millionaires screaming at billionaires. And I think that that's going to continue to be the narrative as it gets deeper into it. And the other thing too, I'm just going to be honest, I think a lot of those actors, I think they're going to come to a sad realization that at some point they're going to have to start going back to work. Because I don't know if, excuse me, because I think a lot of the SAG money came from donations from a lot of the bigger name actors, if I remember correctly. So I remember seeing like people like Gal Gadot, Ryan Reynolds, I think donating like $1 million each, and a couple of other names, if I remember right, to put into the strike fund. But when those actors who have production companies start hurting for it, I think unfortunately you're going to see people start caving. And I think once the lines start to falter, because the executives can hold out as long as they want, they're still getting paid no matter what. That's my fear, is that the executives are going to sit there and say, well, shit, we're making our money regardless. You guys go right ahead. Like the C-suite gets paid no matter what.
No, they absolutely do. But I mean, the longer the strike goes on, the lower the stock price goes.
Right.
And I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of people like us to make sure that as many of our viewers, and hopefully new viewers, can understand what the reality of this situation is, so that we can attempt to dispel the idea that, as you put it, these are just millionaires yelling at billionaires.
Right.
Because the more that people like us can help to better educate the general public on what's actually happening, what they're really fighting for, the better off this is all going to be. And honestly, even if you wanted to say that, well, these are just wealthy people yelling at other wealthier people,
right?
There was actually one guy who I absolutely love on TikTok, traditionally a Star Wars TikToker that has gone full strike updates since all this started. Fantastic. I'll find his name here in a second, but he had a very interesting argument to put this into perspective, as far as, well, okay, let's just say that your assumption that these are, people that most writers are making, like, say, $200,000 a year. So what do they have to complain about? They're probably getting paid high for living anywhere other than California, so they're just suffering because they're in California. Okay, let's make the argument of that and say, okay, well, what happens if you personally were making $200,000, but then you found out that because of some shady practices of the company that you work for, you could have been making $100,000 more than that, and they were essentially stealing $100,000 a year from you.
Oh yeah.
That you earned through your labor.
Yeah.
How would you feel about that?
Oh, absolutely.
What would your reaction be?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you're talking about, you're not making enough to make your, to pay your bills and, get insurance, or you're talking about somebody who makes enough to be able to pay for their normal living, but they're just not getting paid fully fairly for what they've actually done.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the argument is still the same when it comes to arguing on behalf of the average worker. If your proper compensation for your labor is being in some way artificially reduced or stolen by the company you work for,
absolutely,
that needs to be corrected, period.
Right. And to the educated person, that is a great argument. But unfortunately, I don't think that the majority of the people out there are educated on what's actually going on with this.
And that's, like I said, where we come in.
Right.
But
because I go back to the old adage from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And not to get too political, but when people are struggling to pay bills and everything like that, the middle class, the lower middle class, lower class, that kind of thing, as the longer and longer this goes on, it's going to be, what are they bitching about? They're still millionaires. Like I said, that's what I fear this turns into. It's just rich people yelling at rich people. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to pay my rent.
I think the thing that's going to save the Hollywood unions right now is the fact of how many other unions are starting to go on strike, and how many other industries are voting to unionize.
Absolutely.
I think having an increasing prevalency of unions acceptance throughout multiple industries across the country is going to change some perspectives on what's actually being fought for.
I think it very well could.
And speaking of the guy, the TikToker that I was talking about, that was Star Wars and is now very much heavily involved in the strike news. Fantastic guy, Mace Windu. Fantastic, love his stuff. Not the same as the TikToker we suggested last time. He's not giving you daily updates from the picket line, but he definitely has some pretty solid takes on trying to explain the bullshit arguments that you're hearing from the studios getting republished in all the major magazines. It really does put perspective on things, albeit in a typical TikTok sketch format.
Yeah.
But it works, honestly. It's very easily consumable, and get it, move on, see what happens. I think at least a couple of you out there will appreciate his sense of humor. So, with that, thank you so much.
Yes.
For joining us. I know we've definitely gone along today, but once again, just like we said last time, there are a lot of details with this strike. There's going to be a lot more that we still have to cover.
Yep.
But for now,
I mean, there's even talk that this could spill over into the video game industry, which we didn't even touch on.
I know we mentioned
spoilers possibly for next week.
I think we mentioned a little bit about that last time. I'm not sure, but yeah, we'll definitely be covering that soon, because there's a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack there.
Like, this is probably a shakeup of the entire entertainment industry,
and then some. Yes, but so as always, if you have not already, please be sure to like our video and follow us over on Facebook if you prefer to watch us there, or like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell over on YouTube if you prefer to watch us there. The notification bell in particular is important so that the Googles will know to let you know every time we go live, or post any of our content from our interviews, our convention coverage, or any of the other random stuff that we tend to do.
So there is a convention next month.
Yeah. And of course, if you want to be able to check out more of our content but don't have time for the videos, you can always go check out Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, and Stitcher, because, reasons and stuff.
Yep. All the reasons, all the stuffs.
At least some of them.
Yeah.
Maybe not all, but some.
70%?
Yeah, sure. Let's be generous.
Yeah. Still passing.
But with that, guys, if you have made this long, thank you so much for sticking around.
Absolutely.
We always appreciate it. And as always, until next time.
Did you forget your line there for a second? Yeah.
As always, until next time, I'm Brad. That's Mike. We're Dallas Geek. And see ya.
Ah!